Welcome to the 2-month review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take one book, break it down section by section, bit by bit, talk about it, analyze it, have fun, make jokes, all of that. We are in season 12, in which for the first 3 weeks, we're talking about Cars on Fire by Mónica Ramón Ríos, who is joining us today. Welcome, Mónica.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And I am Chad Post of Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Hi, Chad. Thank you for having me as well. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. This is wonderful.
I almost got 1/3 of that intro right.
Yeah, hey, you'd go to the Hall of Fame batting 1/3, so not bad.
That's true. It's 98 degrees. And we don't have air conditioning, so yeah. It's tough. I opened up the window and it was like a furnace blast.
I have really good news though. My daughter just went to the bathroom and I need to go wipe her bottom for her. So it happened at the very beginning rather than the middle of our converson today. So that works great. This is perfect timing. I'll be right back. You guys have fun.
Okay.
You got Brian, I mean, you know the kids scene. Brian has that problem. I have the problem of my son refuses to go to this last week of school, so he won't do any of his work or go to his Zoom class.
Oh.
It's fun.
Oh, well, I'm not that against, I'm not against that.
There. No, I agree generally, but he didn't do it for like a month, so it's a little bit more complicated.
There are many things that people can get educated in instead of just math or science. I don't know, Chad, just put some headphones on. I don't want to have to censor myself.
Oh no, you're fine. He doesn't
care.
It doesn't matter. We've already gone through all the various arguments and fights that one must have to get your kid to do the least amount of work at this point in time. But anyways, so we're talking about the second section today of Cars on Fire, which is Invocation and includes Cars on Fire. Is it the animal mosaic, the object, and Invocation itself. So 4 stories. But the longest section of the book. But we'll go over that. And we can go over them story by story and ask you questions and let you talk about where they came from. But for the sake of the audience, we didn't go over this, I don't think at all. Do you want to talk a little bit about your writing career and like what you've been doing as a whole and how you came to write Cars on Fire in particular?
Okay, yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So I have 2 other books of fiction. And before this one, both of them in Spanish, and they haven't been translated into English. So I started writing, short stories as a very young and publishing them in magazines in Latin America, or anthologies that I was invited to, and all this while I was studying literature in the university. Like how in Latin America, we don't study like college that you have here and choose a major. You just study just one thing. So since you're 18 years old, you just read literature from everywhere in the world. So actually, when we graduate, we know a lot more than. So I came to grad school here, and I thought I was like, I knew so much compared to my other classmates. I was
American college students are dumb. Let me just frame that and say American college students going to.
I didn't say that.
Nothing. They're dumb. This is words straight out of Monica's mouth.
No, I didn't say that. It's like, it's a different style of education. Very different. I forgot everything. There was this 2 career paths that I had in mind. One was to become an artist, and one to become an astronomer, because I was really good at math and physics. And after studying literature, I forgot all about that. So, there is a sense of, of the colleges in the United States to build on certain other, areas of the curriculum of a human person, of a person that is not just one exclusive path. But then in Chile, you graduate and you know a lot of literature. You read everything, and especially what's not assigned to you in class, of course. And most of the education you get is from smoking weed in the gardens of the university.
That's
and just
I get.
yeah. So there's a lot about that, and you also get a lot of political education there, and that was very important for my generation. Imagine I was born, in 78, so I spent a good 10 years under a dictatorship, and a good 10 years under the fucking 90s in Chile, which was like, the neoliberal opening of Chile, right? So it was pretty bad years to be a teenager, actually. And so when I studied literature, in the university, you get your political education there. And that's where I started writing. And it was sort of like a search of many things. I mean, one of the things that was important to me, I didn't have any really good female professors. Like, all the big shots at that moment were male. And so I found most of my maestras outside the university, and by conversations with people, especially after I graduated. And then, and not even when I did my master's in Universidad de Chile, I remember I didn't have like that. Well, I've never been very keen on having maestros. Like, I'm bad with authority for the things that I explained to you before the live stream. But I did find some, and I think you mentioned this on the last week. One of the most important is Diamel Altit. I mean, she is a writer who wrote about politics, who writes fiction, but she also has this immense academic career, and which is all part of her political activism. That's the way you would call it here. She would call it like acciones de arte, and in her collective, but this is what she was doing. She was doing activism with art, with literature. She was writing. She was doing an intervention in literature, and that's how I started to understand where I can build my own writing. So she was a major influence. Also, I wrote my thesis in Severo Sarduya, the Cuban gay novelist who fled Cuba for France, and he was a follower of Lacan. So he had like this very dense kind of writing. And then when I did my master's, something happened. I started reading the scripts of writers. Right? So I have this other piece of my work that happens in relation to film.
Right.
All the text and the literature that comes out of, to film, criticism, scripts, all that kind of things also feeds into my interests. So my first novel was published in 2010. It's titled Segundos, and it's about a couple, a girl and a boy who commit suicide during the 90s after they graduate from like a high-end high school. And they cannot, well, this is the whole thesis. It's about neoliberalism. It's about being a teenager in the 90s and the expense of that, and not being able to handle, the confusing movements of neoliberalism. And then in 2014, I published, in 2014 and 2015, I published Alias El Rocío and Alias El Rusio, which are like wicked twins. They look very much alike, but Alias El Rusio is more weaker. I mean, it's weaker. Sorry, I said that badly in English. I've been talking Spanish for so long that my English kind of. Okay, no, she's Alias El Rusio is mean. It's really mean and bad, and I would say like sort of like a witch in many ways for me. I mean, in the sense that the writing is very much experimental. I tried to work with the idea of intensity there. So kind of the image that I had in Alias El Rusio was that the page would kind of grab you and drown you into the page, instead of like moving forward page by page, right? So the texture of the novel, of the text, is very dense, and it's not meant to be understood, completely. It's not meant to be transparent.
Yeah.
So this, let's think about Glissant and his idea of opacity here. There's something, and it's also like, when you do this, when you write this kind of novels, it's a sort of like a protest into the transparency of language, because there's a language that does not represent you or represent the experiences or your reality. So you need to find something else, and that was for me Alias El Rusio. And I published that when I was, I started writing that when I was still in Chile. I came here to the United States in 2010 to study a PhD in Spanish at Rutgers University. And I published it in 2014, first in Costa Rica, then in 2015 in Chile. And while I was doing that, I started having like this experiences, if you must. I mean, I came to the United States, and I was like in a very protected environment in a certain sense, because I lived on campus, I worked there. So suddenly, when I moved to New York 2 years after arriving, and I had to travel back and forth from New York to New Jersey, I had like all this tension built up inside me after certain things I saw and heard, and situations that happened to me at Rutgers, that I started writing. That's where things like the head appeared, the student appeared. Those are very much informed by things that I saw there, or feelings. I mean, it's not that I actually saw student or had a student who was killed by a bullet that came in through the window, but there was like I felt that all these things, this was very foreign to me. The idea of gun ownership, it's just something that I would never ever fucking understand. I mean, I come from a dictatorship, and it's a certain, and this is this kind of idea that in the United States there's a certain naturalization of violence that scares me a lot. So I wanted to write about that, about being scared, ominously scared. I mean, it's something that is, you cannot point to where it is. It's just you're with something that's completely foreign, sort of like the ghost of violence in many senses. And also inspired on a very specific situation that happened to me just when I arrived. I think it was the first semester. So I was doing a replacement class for a colleague, and it was a Spanish class, and we were talking about this class was happening in New Brunswick, and New Brunswick is a very, you would say, it's like segregated city. So you have like the university, and you have like this. Then you have the Black neighborhood, and you have the Latino neighborhood. And I used to live in the Latino neighborhood, but the students thought that Latino neighborhood was very dangerous. That's where I lived, right? I mean, it wasn't, you have to be careful. I mean, there was a lot of drug dealing also, but also many people just living there, speaking Spanish. And that seemed too dangerous. So I was like teaching this class for a friend, for a colleague, and and the question was, what would you change in the city just to practice Spanish, right? And one of the students said, I would tell all the Mexicans to go back to their country. Wow. And I'm just like standing there. I mean, and then what would I think I said, like, poor boy, the whole thing, the things I said to him, like I ended up like, and there was like this group of people like shouting outside the building, like doing, I don't know, something related to sports, and it sounded like a protest. So I said, like, be careful, those are the Mexicans going to get you, right? Things like that. I ended up like, and the students were like, what's going on? And I remember like sharing this with, we had like this sort of like a support group between like the new teaching assistants. Mm-hmm. And the person who led this, she was a new professor that I admire a lot, but she said, you shouldn't have said anything. And I was like, what? and I wrote that story, and yeah, the head, you can imagine this is, I am identified with the person who goes into the office to ask for one more year of funding, and they say, go back to your country. That's what I got, from the chair of the department at that moment. I'm not saying that Rutgers is a bad place. I mean, I had so many good experiences and mentors there, but I also had this, and I never really expected, in a place where you go and have classes on Marxism, on decoloniality, to have this, no, go back to your country, you're not going to get the class because it's usually for American citizens, so let American citizens teach Spanish, right? You have like native speakers here and you want this, those kind of things. That was obituary. Mm-hmm. And I was very enraged. So there's a lot of funerals there. You can see that was my little dungeons. Yeah. And when I was like planning out the book, I thought I needed to lighten it up a little bit. I needed something. I didn't want it to be like a super gloomy book. I wanted to talk about love, and that's when this monsters of a short story of Invocation came along. Like I wanted to write about love, and I ended up writing Cars on Fire and Invocation and The Animal Mosaic, which are about love in a certain way, but sort of like fleeting love, sort of like in relation to politics, and also about migration, about being, what's the experience of loving as an outsider, that kind of thing. And the other experimental pieces that Robin Myers will talk about with you guys next week, mm-hmm. which are scenes from the spectral zone. The Extermination and the Root were mainly things that I wanted to introduce that talked about Chile. So I was thought as the point where I go back to Chile. Right. So the Extermination is about San Juan de la Guada, and the Root I was thinking about Bio region, where there's still like a lot of struggle between for the land between Mapuche communities and the state. No, and not the state. Here I talk a little bit about the company that does the paper in Chile that belongs to a family called Larraín Mate, which is the family of the very famous filmmaker Pablo Larraín. And that have like also political liaisons. So I was talking a little bit about that, as well as, those guys that just take things and then build a career on that.
Awesome. That's a really good overview of this of this book and of your career. I knew about the Rutgers part. I knew that part was Rutgers. I just have to say, if any of my Rutgers friends is watching, I just love all of you guys. It's just, it's the institution. You cannot have somebody talking about Marxism in Spain and saying, "Hey, you are not allowed to do that because no." Yeah, no. That's the problems of academics, right? It's don't let me get started there. One of the problems. So you do have a question. It said, if the novel of yours that you mentioned is a witch, what kind of misfit is Cars on Fire? Oh yeah. I think it's very literal. I mean, that's why I titled it Cars on Fire. The image, what the car represents now, sort of like symbolic of what the car is. It's sort of like, for me, it represents sort of like the utopia of capitalism. I remember, in the short story Cars on Fire, I said at some point that, Hitler based his machine of death on the Ford on the Ford structure of production. Well, that's kind of the idea that I was thinking about the car. That's the sort of like the moment where all the symbolism of the car kind of crystallizes. And I set it on fire.
for me, the idea of, and also all the images of the riots. I was living at that point, and Cars on Fire is very specifically, it talks about North Atlantic and Nostrand. It's about Crown Heights. I was living there, and and I had been reading about the riots of the 90s there, and all the images that popped up, also about the death of a Black youth, and the images that popped up are about things on fire, and especially cars on fire. So I had a neighbor at that moment that had this very strange car. Okay, so this car that I talk about, the Mercedes from '79, that is sort of like beige, and he was like very old and rusty. And the strangest thing is that the neighbors on the other side had the fucking same car, but in perfect condition. And, I mean, I've never seen that car before. I never seen that again. But the two people that own that in New York lived on the either sides of my house. Okay, so I was getting obsessed. I was writing my dissertation at the moment, and I put my desk looking out the window, and so it was in the third floor. So I surveilled all the street, like while I was smoking and drinking coffee and wine and writing about film. And I saw my neighbors like coming, going all the time, and I started like, he became, I think I talked to him once. I don't even remember his name, but if you're there, you inspired this story.
That's hilarious. When I was reading the section for this, you mentioned that it was the section that's about love, kind of like it's the love section in a lot of ways. But the other thing it seemed to me is the way that love is portrayed is both like transformative, transforming, and that it moves on to different objects as it goes. Like in some ways, like his relationship to the car is a relationship to his father, is a relationship to the American dream ideal. There's like various things that sort of plot through there, but the love seems to be, love isn't like one thing that you're in love with a person or with whatever, and that's static, and that those two people are static. There's like a lot of transformation in here. It seemed like to me.
Yeah, well, all these stories ended up, I mean, I'm telling you this, I think my idea would have been to write like a very melodramatic story. But once I started like thinking about what love is and how I felt it and how I experienced it, nothing seemed enough, so the idea that the only way in which you can experience or understand love is from the very particular way in which you are and experience how would you put it, the transmission of things between two or more people. I mean, you can also think about all the love that goes on the protests right now. I mean, you go there and you feel what is that energy? What is, I mean, I know that, more realist political theorists are just thinking, how are we going to make this into a new government or political system? And just say like, just feeling this for a little while is fucking enough. So it's not about, the happy ending, having like a marriage at the end, or nothing else like that in my stories. Actually, in Cars on Fire, one of the women goes on the Animal Mosaic. They just fuck and we're teenagers, all cool, keep on going with your life. And in Invocation, well, they never do anything, and they encounter, this encounter starts like many decades after that happened. So that kind of the possibilities for me, it ended up about being a discussion about the possibilities of intense feelings between people, of people and things, and the transformations, and how we really get transformed by love. How we occupy different places of function. I mean, this idea of what love is and how, I mean, that transformation is it's an essential part of love for me. If you take into account something that is not really melodramatic in the sense that there's a character that falls in love. That part of falling in love is just never been enough for me. I've had a very tormentous love life. Not with Carlos though. Carlos has been great, but before that, with Carlos as well. We've been together for so long, but mine has been very tormentous. So I just wanted to explore the storm, but even the word storm seems not enough. I mean, I keep thinking about the romantics, and although I do love or did love the romantics at some point, it's not just about seeing something. It's about how the very specific bodily transformations, bodily and mind transformations, and everything, and the continuity of the self. I don't work with the idea of the mind body separation. I told you I come from a family of doctors. That's why I don't do that. So I don't separate that, and I wanted to work with the bodily transformations also to represent how we get transformed. I mean, in Invocation, they not only the sex change of one of the characters, no, not just one, many of the characters, but also they turn into cats, they turn into clouds, into there's this one character that sees the mother having sort of like a erotic relation with the flower and pollen, and well, I was reading Marosa Di Giorgio also, like her Misales, which are erotic short stories, and it's also about bodily transformations. I've been talking a lot. Brian, say something.
I have a funny story about, well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing about the writing process. And you're very, you give a lot more than I would have ever given about stuff I've written. So thank you for that. That was a great little sneak peek into the mind of a mad scientist. I appreciate it. But last week, I didn't get a chance to say, but with Dead Men Don't Rape, I remember when I was a teenager. This was back when they have those vans for radio stations, and they would give away promotional material. And we were skateboarding, and one of those vans for the indie rock station was parked outside the skate shop. And so we all like clamored to it to get some like free swag. And this is like when they gave out little cassette tapes. And so they're giving them all away, and my friends are like getting like Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden and stuff like that. And then he gets to me and is like, something great for you, kid. And he hands me, one of them is a promo copy for a band called Green Jelly, and the other one was 7 Year Bitch, and it was for the
there we go.
It was for the got those, yeah. And so I remember like, oh cool, and I put it on. I'm like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Like I'd never really heard stuff like that before, right? Because it doesn't get a lot of radio play. This was 1996, I think. So so it was just funny to like see I was like, oh man, I listened to them before anybody in my city did, because I just happened to get it from a disc jockey. It was so random and so cool. But
that's so funny. So in 1994, I worked at a radio station and did some of those promotions. Like we'd have to go to the dance clubs and like hype up the
wow.
102.5.
Always a salesman.
102.5 The Fox was the name of the station, and we had to go to like high school football games and give out stuff. But what we were giving out was like Soul Asylum's Runaway Train. Pretty much
oh God, there you go.
We were a top 40 station.
I remember that song.
Oh yeah, you can't forget it. Once it's there, unfortunately. So I have a question, like a practical question for people, or for you. People might wonder. So if you haven't read this, Invocation is written in 2 columns for the first 30 pages or so, and then it comes together into a singular, like quote unquote regular way of writing. Is there a way that you want people to read the 2 columns? Like it's just the one on the left and the one on the right, or back and forth? Or it also reminded me, this is tangential, but there's a lot of triangles in this section. There's a lot of things that are like 2 things that become a third, or there's like a pairings of different people. Like the Animal Mosaic has 3 main characters that sort of rotate. There's a lot of like triangular, like non-Hegelian, but like sort of hinting that way. Like even with the object, it's like the character Gordon Lish, and the object. There's lots of like these three-way relationships that I thought was really interesting. That's not a question, statement.
That's a super big, like, many-sided question. I can talk a little bit about Invocation, which is, I think, for a lot of time, it was my favorite short story. That kind of short story that you have in the collection, when you read it, you kind of get excited again. And when you're just like rewriting them, but this one I was like, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how, you know, I wrote it in 2 columns because I was trying to reflect on the idea of how 2 people can experience the same thing in very different ways. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to, the first time I was trying to one piece and then the other one piece and then the other one, but it just didn't work because it got sort of like hierarchical. It had a hierarchy in the sense that I was guiding and there was a character that sort of like explained before.
Yeah.
So I needed some kind of simultaneity there. I'm not sure how I want the readers to read. They're super free to read it, just the one story or jumping from one of the other, because it's actually a dialogue, right? So it's happening sort of simultaneously. There's some like links between the dialogue that you can catch in between. But at some point, sort of the story on the left column kind of like drifts away to the past, right? And then we just lose like all sense of the conversations that's happening on the present. Right. And then the story of the column on the right, which is the voice of an older writer that the younger writer is interviewing. Sort of starts talking about a novel that she wrote about love, and it's sort of like you would say like a postmodernist gesture, sort of like meta something. I mean, it quotes a lot of theories and academics about love. Alexandra Kollontai quotes Marosa Di Giorgio, Audre Lorde, sort of like all these women that talked about love in different ways. And with that, I start like building the novel of this older writer. It's also like a theory about the past, about how you remember these kinds of things. So it has to be, I mean, it's not just one thing, how you remember things. You remember things from bits and pieces that you gather from your own experience, but sort of like intuitions of how the other person also experienced this same thing that you did, right? This intense emotion of love. And I'm going to tell you something. Like, the thing is that I wrote this story, Invocation, and this is how it started, right? So the thing is that when I wrote Segundos and Alias, and the 2 aliases, I started like experiencing things when, like rereading the novels and kind of realizing that things that I've written there had happened afterwards in my life. So I sort of like got a little scared. Like, I'm saying this with a smile because it's very ridiculous, of course. But I got like scared. I said, like, I need to write something that is good. I mean, I've been writing obituary for so many years, and I was like, I need to write something that's good. Something that's nice, that's gonna bring something nice into my life. So I said, like, I'm gonna write this, that's invoking thing. It's something that's good. So I'm gonna write about love. But then this monster came out, this thing that transforms, and this, you don't know if it's a cat or a person, or something like the wind, or you don't know in the end who's talking. Yeah. Who's this person who's like, getting off with a cat?
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. I like that. I realized, as I said, the thing about the 3-part stuff too, or the 3 things in that story, in those first 2 columns, there's actually like the two speakers and then all the quotes are almost a third party to it too, because it's like, well, I'm not going to reply to you. I can just go back to this quotation. So it's like there's like a third entity there as well, which makes it really interesting. So what about the object? So did you see Gordon Lish speak at Book Culture on 112th Street?
Yeah, so Carlos dragged me to this book
in every way.
We just arrived, and Carlos, a friend of Carlos was editing that book, so he dragged me into that presentation, and we got there, and the setting was so strange because it was full of chairs with just like two people, I mean, it's this is not really a short story, and I think we had this conversation chat that I thought for a long time, with Robin as well. If this is this story should go in the book, because it's not really a fiction short story. I wrote it after I went there, and to just archive all the appreciations. And I published this the first time in a book that was edited by the Peruvian writer Claudia Salazar. She was, she wanted short stories of many Latin American writers that were living at the time in New York and that wrote about New York. So I just wrote this, just sort of. And she said it can be a short story or some sort of a chronicle. I said, okay, a chronicle it is. So for me, it's like absolute reality what happened there, and I think all the story about the object and what he said about the object is true. He said, "I am the object," and I was like, kind of, and I thought at some point that and I remember seeing this woman that right in front of me. Because this is all what happened. We sat like not in the first two lines of chairs, but in the fifth or something like that. There was nobody there, and so he asked everybody to move, and I said, and I didn't move, and he thought that was terrible. So he started saying like, there's some people that don't want to get close to the object. And of course he was referring to us, right? Because we're the only ones that hadn't, moved forward. And he started talking about all the things that, all their readings of these Nobel Prize winners that was funded by Exxon to clean their images. And he was very proud of that. And I remember like seeing this woman like sitting in front of me. There was wine, right? So she was holding like a cup, like this, like a cup of white wine. And she was like so afraid. She didn't sip on the wine for the whole like 50 minutes. So I found at this point that it was that the whole setting was more interesting than what he was talking about. And the whole setting was just like showing the ruin of this man, right? That was so powerful at some moment, at one moment. And yeah, I would have put the object in obituary.
True. Although
it's my obituary to the living Gordon Lish. He's still alive, right?
He is, right?
Yeah, I love this passage here. It's inside is a city that no longer exists. Outside we can breathe. Inside is anxiety, the fear of a tyrannical white man who watches with horror and rage as the world transforms around him, as if it were the code of some indecipherable science. I thought that was a fantastic way of taking that and bringing it outside. That's great.
I had that marked. Yeah. My favorite line is, "No one buys his book."
It's true. Nobody bought his book. I remember the bookseller saying like buy it, and then like, no.
Oh, that's right. I wrote them. Carmen Miranda. I had a question for you. That's a really. It's mostly a joke, but I was curious. So I was looking up Vanished because I did not realize that Guillermo Cabrera Infante wrote the the script for Vanishing Point. Like, that's wild. That's cool. I think I might have seen that movie in college, but I don't remember like the vaguely.
I love it.
So when I was looking it up,
oh, macho.
Okay, I'll avoid it. But
Like a macho fantasy.
there's a new Vanishing Point that was made in like 1997, starring Jason Priestley from Beverly Hills 90210. And I wanted to
I've never seen that
movie so bad, and I wondered if you knew if it was a remake of that movie, because it is. I want to watch the Jason Priestley version.
Yeah, I wasn't quoting that one. Didn't have the chance to see.
Yeah.
I don't even. Yeah, I think I remember that guy, that Jason Priestley.
Yeah, he had the sideburns.
Yeah, he's supposed to be cute, right?
Yeah, and he had the same like poofy like thing hair, but it was like Luke.
Did you see it, Chad?
Priestley. What's that?
Did you see it?
No, I don't know. No, but when I was looking at IMDb up the Guillermo Cabrera Infante stuff, I saw this other one pop up, and I was like, if this is a remake, I should watch.
I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it now.
I mean, with that.
Beverly's going to destroy it for me.
Here's a super random one. Did you know that Joan Didion co-wrote Up Close and Personal, Robert Redford, Michelle Pfeiffer film? I have no idea why. I looked that up last week because my wife and I were talking about Michelle Pfeiffer, and we were talking about news for some reason, and so I looked up the screenwriter for that, and it was Joan Didion and her husband that wrote that one. Random.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I love Michelle Pfeiffer. I just can't. It's just so beautiful.
When I was
with all her Botox and everything, I mean, it's just Yeah. Well, but let me talk a little bit about Vanishing Point, because I mean, it's my favorite part in that story when I talk about Vanishing Point. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this book about scripts by writers. So I focused on Manuel Puig and Ricardo Piglia. It was like my master's thesis, and then it turned into an essay. And got like a super important award there in Chile. And I remember I was in touch at that time with Ricardo Piglia. A common friend introduced me to him. I was like super young, and he said, he was in Princeton at the moment, and he told me, here in Princeton, I just saw the script by Guillermo Cabrera Infante, so he sent me they have it like in reels. How do you say
microfiche?
Microfilms. So he sent me this to Chile, and it came like in a format that I never found the machine to watch it. So I so I have it there, like old like microfilmed. I just like kept like looking at it like this. I think I once saw it when I came here in Princeton, actually, with the machine that they had there. But there's also something that always I like a lot. I don't know if you know this, Chad, but I work a lot with archives. So I kind of have like this fetishistic relationship with papers of writers and how they correct and rewrite. And so I got very obsessed with it. I finally didn't end up including Cabrera Infante in that essay because there's too much written about him, and the idea was that I wouldn't write about something that's been written about him so much. So sort of like focusing on something different, and that is Manuel Puig. Manuel Puig is a great scriptwriter, and his relationship to film. Ricardo Piglia, I have to say, he's a great writer, also a great, how would you say, like magician of literature, like putting people here, putting people there, but as a scriptwriter, not that good, right? But Manuel Puig was, super, he was thinking about the medium. He was thinking about what it meant to provoke emotions in, not only in the screen, but before the screen, in the paper before the screen. And so in Cars on Fire, it was like that's why I also write about Lelouch's film, which is a film I saw like a long time ago, but that image of the car, like riding like these cliffs in, the French Riviera, and then, really, and I put it was an Alfa Romeo, but I didn't check because it's fiction, so I can be wrong.
Right. Absolutely. Related to that though, since you're a film person, what 5 Criterion Channel movies should we all watch?
5. I can say like 100.
No, you can.
So Losing Ground is there now. You should all see the cruise films also. I mean I forgot her name. What's the name of the director of Losing Ground? Can you look it up?
I'll look as you go on with other ones.
And they put a very well curated selection of early Black films and filmmakers. That's good to watch. There's a lot that I don't know.
Kathleen Collins.
Kathleen Collins.
Yeah.
And she has 2 there, Losing Ground and the Cruz Brothers. I recently watched the Cruz Brothers. I really loved it. I can tell you like the films that I've watched recently that I've liked. I watched Siama's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I thought it was amazing. I mean, she's great. Yeah. I mean, when I saw Water Lilies a few years ago, I thought like, what is this? It's different. I love the way she narrates. And this one's very good. I also liked, I saw this Mexican film that was like, they made a lot of fuss about it. It's called I Am Not Here, which is about this it's not a street gang, but it's sort of like a dance gang, like this cumbia-based movement in Monterrey called Colombia. And I mean, it's very well constructed. It has some amazing images. I mean, I have a few criticisms, so we're not going to go there. But that's I think on Netflix. I think, and I don't know, maybe all of Cassavetes' new films. Just watch whatever. I mean, Love Streams is my favorite from him. I don't know. There's so many films. It's like, what's your favorite book? It's like, oh my God. I hate that question. What's your favorite color? I don't know.
Oh, so that one
depends on what you have on the side.
Like 5 books that you can choose from. That's easy. It's like when you look at like Netflix, or even Netflix is overwhelming to me, but Criterion Collection, like the app is so poorly organized that I never know what to do. I just pick on random things. Like, so anyone telling me what to do is good.
Depends if you like this melodramas. I recently saw like all the Fools films. I don't know if you know him, this German director. He has like these grandiose melodramas. I really loved it. I mean, I don't know if you like those kind of things. I like all kind of movies, even the shitty ones. Not all of them. I mean, I'm less tolerant with shows like TV shows or comedies. I don't like comedies that much. You can tell, right? I like dramas, like action movies. I don't like that much.
Yeah. Transformers.
No, I don't like that kind of thing. I also saw like American Gigolo again. I remember I had seen it like a long time ago, and I thought that I remember when I was young. What's the name of the actor of American Gigolo? He's super famous. Like it's like a sex symbol of the older generation. Yeah. What?
I can picture him, but I cannot think of the name. Someone also said.
Well, so I remember seeing that. I remember seeing that when I was a child and saying like, this old man, and I see this, Richard Gere, and I see Richard Gere, and I'm like, oh, he's like very beautiful. I remember seeing that, and the film was like okay, but just because he had like this male sex symbol there, so I found that interesting as well. As you see, I see everything. Today I'm just gonna watch that collection of Black cinema, because there's a lot that I haven't seen, a lot of like silent film that I haven't seen. I think I've just seen one of all the collection. So that's like a good discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing, there was a question last week about authors that your writing reminded us of. A new one this week that reminded me of, there's certain elements of like Marguerite Duras that came up for me when I was reading it this week.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, who you would say? Who would you compare?
I don't know. God, I don't know.
Or like people who influence
well,
you.
Marguerite Duras has always been like, I love her films, by the way. I don't know if they're in Criterion, but
I don't think so.
When I saw India Song, it was like poor sensual pleasure, and I think that Hiroshima Mon Amour must be there. Like the film is also very good. I love it. Let's see, writers that I don't have.
No worries. I just wondered if there's someone that you're like, oh, actually, like there's this really great writer that you might not have even. Might not know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I have a at the end of the book. I don't know if I included that in this. Did you include the list? Well, I have a list of all the things that I actually quoted when I was writing. I think there's a lot that just passed by, and I didn't even say because I forgot about them. So right now, I can tell you what I'm reading right now. So I just finished reading Fernanda Melchor's Temporada de Huracanes, that I know is available in English as well, and it's doing very well. And I'm reading Baldwin's essays, so Notes on a Native Son, and this is kind of interesting for this conversation because in Notes of a Native Son, he talks about the protest novel. He starts like talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin and how that is so important for making the case for the abolition of slavery. But he says like there's like a problem there, right? Yeah. Because the problem is that the relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor is because they belong together. They are just one unit. And any novel that wants to create a complex idea about a problem of society needs to dissect both sides. The oppressor and the oppressed, right? And I think that is very interesting. And remember, sort of like I was rereading that section last night, and thinking about Dead Man Don't Rape, for example. So I think I told you, or I talked about this somewhere else, but when some of my writer friends in Chile read the book, they said some very interesting things, like, I have never read short stories like this before. This is very good because it's different. And also they said it was going to be difficult to publish them because they were, you cannot relate them to this writer or this other writer. But they all told me that they thought Dead Men Don't Rape was sort of like pamphlets, like it was very direct. And they saw that as a sort of like a problem. But, I was very aware that when I wrote that, it was very specific to the United States. And I think that with that short story, I got the sense of the different literary traditions. I mean, there's something very effective in literature here in the United States that needs to, be communicable, like transparent in what you are saying. So you can, the idea of flipping the pages, sort of like Stephen King kind of thing. Like, and Dead Man Don't Rape, I think you have sort of that sense. But on the other hand, it's not like a pamphlet. I mean, if we follow the idea of Baldwin saying how this, all of the pamphlets that he, or the protest novel that he is criticizing, sort of take into account just one thing, the one thing that has to be abolished, which is slavery, right? but there's no real no real dissection of how this relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor happens. I mean, the criticism has to be to the oppressor mostly, right? Or the investigation, like what's that need, that profound need of enslaving somebody. And when I was, and I think that when I wrote Dead Man Don't Rape, this idea of the two voices again was very important. So for those of you who haven't read this, Dead Man Don't Rape has like the voice of these presidential discourses that were imagining back in 2016 all of Trump's possible. The election hadn't happened yet, actually. We were sort of imagining in this reading that we did, which was called The U.S. Without Us. And we invited a lot of Latino and Latin American writers to write about, the future if Trump got elected. I mean, the reality was much worse than whatever we thought at that moment. But I wrote that for what?
That's fake news. It's better. It's all perfect.
Right. So I wrote that for that reading. And what I did was I read a lot of presidential discourses from the United States, so Obama, Bush, and even Clinton. And there are lines that are textual, they're quoted textual from Obama and Bush especially, right? And I think in Invocation also there's the line of when they said like this land of fertile I don't know what, it's Bush talking in Africa.
Oh, right.
So and it's important to me to the other character, the other voice is this woman, is this migrant who settles in Seattle and starts a punk band at the same time that her mother gets deported, and she starts living alone by herself in the United States, and then the members of the band get raped and murdered. So it's this whole kind of I don't know, like violence after violence that Latino women have to endure here in the U.S. But there's also this idea that the person who writes the speeches for this guy who won the election in 2016 is this woman, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the idea that she loses in all this kind of violence after violence, she loses her voice to this man, and she ends up writing these things.
Yeah.
So my idea, and at some point, was to. It ends with a short thing that this short story, this vengeance is to be continued.
Yeah.
And at some point, my idea was in fact to write a second part and continue this, and that's when Invocation came along, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't seem necessary at some point. It seemed that everything that I had to say about these characters interaction of the oppressed, of an oppressed that became voiceless and gave their voice to this white dude. Mm-hmm. And it's also inspired in my relationship with my boss at the time. Like I felt that he wanted to steal my voice. I'm not going to mention him though, but it was also happening at the same time, Trump and him. And so that kind of, for me, it's that kind of that relationship that makes it less pamphlet-like. And it's also, you have to think that Man Don't Rape was very much written to be read. So when I read it, it feels like I'm singing, actually.
Yeah.
Especially in this accent of mine.
We should probably start wrapping up in a second, but I do have a question for you about what's going on in Chile and how you would compare the situation that you were involved in down there, like last fall, I guess, a million years ago, with how things are right now. Like, I know you guys just got back, but you came back to a very intense situation.
Yeah, well, I think it's intense, but I also think that like the protests and what people call riots, it's a celebration. I mean, this fucking normality that we're supposed to live in, we're super precarized, especially you can feel that living in New York, when you can hardly see your friends because they're working all the time, trying to earn their money to to pay rent. But on the other hand, or to be successful, whichever, it's two sides of the coin, I guess. But on the other hand, the protests in Chile are also about neoliberalism and this culture of being, in a career. To, if you are in a career, you have to win over somebody. So it's, I mean, for me, it's the emergence of community, of the possibility of a different kind of bond, of visualizing something that has been there for a long time. I mean, when you said at the beginning that this book, Cars on Fire, resonates with the current moment, this was written in the previous moment, and
Yeah.
it's kind of just the same. There's a search for something that's more than what is being handed to us and what is being forced to us, like how to occupy the streets, how to live your life from morning to night, those kind of things. This idea of time, I think it's being disputed, not only space with the protests, but also like time, because the time of capitalism is a really shitty time. You have to be productive all the time. um, and what the protests do is to really try to take time from capitalism, sort of like the same thing that artists do, because we write in the time that we take out of capitalism. We say we are working, but we are actually writing our own stuff, right? So we are taking the time to think what the hell we want. How do we want to live? We have some clues, which is we can see, in the rage. But what I can see, what is happening in Chile or in Hong Kong, even, or what happened amazingly in England. They threw down a monument of a guy who had slaves. I mean, in the most racist country in the world, the one who sort of invented capitalism and this racism that we have to deal with, they're doing that there as well. So people are fed up, and this is kind of what's being visibilized in the protest, and I think it's wonderful. And when you go to Chile, when we went there in February, I wanted to go there to see by myself. I remember like taking Inti, who's my son, my 2-year-old son, to see art, because we usually go to galleries and museums. And I was taking him to the museum in downtown Santiago, and the streets were just plagued with art. I was like, we're not going to the museum. The art is outside now. It's here. I mean, the Museo de Bellas Artes doesn't have this vibrant art. It's here. And everything, it was, there's so much, this whole, well, in Chile it was very symbolic because it started in the subway. So all this underground culture just emerged.
Yeah.
This underground culture, which is based on people living, in other forms, or finding other ways to survive, which are based in community. It's not based on the state. It's in the shadows of the state, actually. And all this emerged from there, from the underground. And there's all these kind of artists and art forms that are happening that just don't get exposed that much, because in Chile, as you know, especially in literature, it's run by very few and very conservative people and media. And it's mostly the male guys writing about melancholic characters, having bad times, walking through like a city which just doesn't give them anything because they need more and more, especially women, right? So that's not enough, and there's this whole amazing kind of underground that has emerged from now. And I think that we're going to, we can't return to normality. I mean, the sanitary crisis was perfect for the government in Chile because it became like social control. Yeah. So people started going into their homes just not to die because the health system there sucks, even worse than here. And I mean, it's not like there's not enough space to treat all the possible people, and they're just letting people die. Yeah. So one of the ways in which people have been protecting themselves has been to stay at their homes, but that means to renew the ways in which you can do protest, and it's not that effective because it doesn't happen in the public sphere, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's all these whole problems, but I might be naive, but it's going to happen anyway because people are just fed up. We cannot go back to whatever we had, and with this economic crisis, it's going to explode much worse. And Chile is much worse. They named as the granddaughter of Pinochet as the Ministra de la Mujer. How do you say ministra? Like the Secretary of Women and Gender Equity. She just quit, and they put somebody who's anti-abortion. In the years where there has been this impressive feminist explosion in Chile. So this is just, it just tells you about the gap. Yeah. And also I have to say that in Chile, like the ruling classes are very ignorant. Like I'm saying, they're very good for money, but they don't know anything about art. They don't know anything about books. They don't read. They think that the only good things that are worth reading are published in Spain, and they don't even read that because the books are so expensive. And so they end up like not doing anything and watching, Netflix or things like that. But, they're super, super ignorant. They don't speak well. They don't go to the museum. They don't know anything. So I have to say we have to take those ignorance the fuck out.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a good place to sort of end. We usually do like the best your favorite quote, which we can do, but I'm gonna include one for you, Monica. You don't have to pick your own because
I love that would be all of them. Are great.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd want to do that. But we do have a comment from a longtime listener, Chris Olson, who says, before the writer died, she held long meetings with her lawyers to discuss the possibility of being buried with all the papers she's written and never published as being a killer opening line, in his opinion. So we'll use that one as a stand-in for what you could have said.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that.
Brian, what do you have?
Let me see. I've got lots of them underlined. You have one that you have ready to go? Mine's in paper form, so it's.
I liked both of the endings in Invocation, the last parts of both columns. I would choose both, but I'll just choose the one. No, I'll choose. Okay, so from the left column, our encounters were many, sporadic, and banal like you, but we could never ignore the fact that we inhabited each other in every single stroke of our pens. And then on the right side, we could never ignore the fact that we inhabited each other in every single stroke of our pens, the everlasting lives in us, or lives in us. The everlasting lives in us.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah,
I
put together.
I just get emotional because I wrote that. Doesn't sound like me.
Finding something.
I really love the ending of Cars on Fire. From the corner of his eyes, he sees that open door car is engulfed in flames, and he leaves it behind at last.
Yeah,
I just love the way that book ended with the beginning. It's like, that kind of idea of people always said heat waves weren't what they used to be. Like the past is so much more intense and better. Or anything in the past is so much better than it keeps us from moving forward. And I like this idea of then fuck it, I'll burn the past. How about that? Walk away from it.
But the heat wave right now is
love that ending.
The heat wave
I know. I think a climate change activist would hate me for that first line.
I'm sweating to death here, so I think that we should end here.
Thank you for having me, listening to me blab about my book.
That was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess that's it. Next week we'll be going over the last section. Like I said, it is pages 155 till the end, so 175. It's only a 20-page section, so if you're following along, short, a couple stories, and we'll talk about that with the translator, Robin Myers, and then we will move on to the next book. But this will have the rest of Cars on Fire next week. So, any final thoughts? Nope. Okay.
No. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Brian. Thank you.